Welcome to Shades of Us. I'm your host, Darryl Brown. Here in New York City, music culture is everywhere.
This month, we visit with a few musicians to hear about what they are adding to New York's cultural mix. According to a 1997 study on the social psychology of music, music is a social phenomenon that is present everywhere, and as the medium by which we shape our environment, it makes a great impact on society.
What is the New York sound of Latin music? Let's meet an author writing about Latin jazz history who started out as a musician.
Growing up in New York City as a musician, playing Latin jazz, playing all different types of Latin music, you really have a sense of what is happening internationally and kind of what local musicians have done with it. Hi, my name is Benjamin Lapidus. I'm a musician, I'm a composer, I'm a professor. I write books about music. I started my professional musical career in the 1980s playing guitar and eventually went off to music school and studied jazz. I play traditional Cuban music, traditional Puerto Rican music, Dominican music, jazz, American pop music. So I have a group called Sonido Isleño, which means island sound, and we're really talking about the sound of the islands of New York, the 5 boroughs and close by. We've been together for 27 years. My group has featured some of the best musicians based in New York City who play Latin jazz and traditional Spanish Caribbean music. They come from all over the Caribbean, all over Latin America. There have been musicians from Panama, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, New York City-based musicians who were born in New York City, and myself, who is not from the Caribbean. I'm an American Jew. I was born here. My father played in Latin and jazz bands when he was a teenager until he was about 22. And he would play those charts in my house and those records, and I really loved it. We moved in a lot of different places. And then I finally moved back to New York City in the 80s. I came to Brooklyn and then I moved to the Upper West Side. And in my neighborhood, there were a number of nightclubs, jazz clubs such as Mikell's, where Art Blakey would play, Dizzy Gillespie. But you also had a lot of Latin clubs, and there were a lot of Latin music street festivals. There were a lot of really, really well-known musicians who lived in my neighborhood and played and hung out. One of those musicians who was very influential in my own life was a multi-instrumentalist named Mario Rivera, who played with Tito Puente and Dizzy Gillespie. I would go to his house and practice with him and hang out. And he was really at this point where the jazz and the Latin music world came together. And I knew from that point on, from when I was a teenager, that's where I wanted to be as well. So there's really a long legacy of Jews, Spanish Caribbean Jews and also American Jews involved in Latin music. So in reality, I was just stepping into that tradition. I, as a kid, had heard about relatives that my father had had in Cuba, Mexico, and Argentina. They were stories that really piqued my interest, and knowing that there was a distant family connection for me was something that also motivated me in my travels to connect with these relatives. So I first went to Cuba in the 1990s because I was trying to find and learn about the music that predated all the music that I was familiar with, popular Cuban music, popular Latin music in New York City. I went to Eastern Cuba to try to learn about music called changui, quiriba, and nengon. It's sort of the base of all popular Cuban music. It's kind of like the Mississippi Delta is to the blues. It's also a crucible of Caribbean culture. You have Haitian music, you have Jamaican music, and Cuban music all coming together in this one region. After all the years that I had been playing popular music, Latin music and Latin jazz, I was remembering all these stories that my elders were telling me on the bandstand, or just having conversations when we were on the road, how they played what they did in certain eras, how things worked in recording sessions, how they tuned their instruments, who made the instruments, and that brought all these questions to my head, and that ultimately led me to write the book called New York and the International Sound of Latin Music, 1940 to 1990. It was all based on rather than looking at Cuba and that early music, it was looking at New York City and all those people who contributed to what we have now as the New York sound of Latin music. I started the initial research for the book probably around 2011. It took me about 8 years to research the book and to write the book. All through that time period, I was teaching classes, playing gigs. I was even the chair of my department in art and music at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. When did the music change? Well, I think it changed with the times because the onus was on the musicians to keep playing dance music, but the musicians were also listening to jazz and listening to the latest rhythms that were coming out of whatever country in the Caribbean they wanted to incorporate. And there was this push to make the music advance. I think you had things that were happening in New York City, like the Salsa Meets Jazz nights at the Village Gate. You had cafeterias like the La Salle Cafeteria, where jazz musicians in the 40s were hanging out with the Latin musicians. That's where Machito's musicians like Bobby Rodriguez were hanging out with the jazz bass players for Charlie Parker, like Major Holly. There was this penetration between the jazz and the sort of mambo musicians. This stuff has been going on for a really long time. And as long as people have been coming here and recording and bringing sort of the latest musical information with them, then somebody else would take it and transform it. And then you have all the people whose parents were from the Spanish Caribbean and the Caribbean in general, and they relish in the fact that they are bicultural and able to speak Spanish and speak English and be up on the latest musical trends. So then you have things like Boogaloo, which are going to combine the best of, soul and R&B with Cuban music and Puerto Rican music. That's how the music was changing, and the records were being made here and then exported outwards. And then musicians sometimes would stay here for 8-10 years and then go back to their countries and bring whatever was happening here. So I made 5 recordings with my own band, and then I've made 3 recordings on the side that are sort of related to what we're talking about today. I did one recording that is a mixture of Jewish music with Cuban and Puerto Rican music. I did another recording with a Japanese musician where we mixed Brazilian music and Cuban music. And then I made a record with a number of Panamanian musicians and Cuban musicians and Puerto Rican musicians where we used the Hammond organ to play Cuban-based music. Hammond organ records traditionally kind of add the conga as kind of a backbeat, as like a condiment to the overall dish. But the idea here was to flip the whole thing around and make the musicians play Latin music, Cuban music, and then add a little jazz to the top of that. So I'm 50 years old. I think that I have achieved a lot in terms of my music and in terms of my scholarship and in my teaching that I didn't necessarily think I was going to be at the point that I am now 20, 30 years ago. Looking back and looking forward, I see that the things that still motivate me are the same: to keep learning, to keep trying to get facts, to keep trying to improve my musicianship. That is kind of a constant.
Hip-hop has changed the landscape of music around the globe and has left an indelible footprint on our culture. Because of this, hip-hop is getting its first museum in its place of origin, the Bronx, New York.
Hip-hop is the most influential art form in the entire world. And many people have said it's America's greatest cultural export. The dancing, the music, the fashion, the language. Hip-hop originated here in the Bronx by Black and brown teenagers who had no intention of creating the super music genre that it has become. My career as a DJ, club promoter, concert promoter, record label owner, television engineer really informed me for everything that I'm doing now, which is being the executive director of the Universal Hip Hop Museum, which will open in 2024. So during the 70s, disco was king, but kids didn't like Donna Summers, they didn't like Giorgio Moroder, they didn't like a lot of the electronic disco. They preferred to listen to soul music, Motown, the Temptations, the Jackson 5, Supremes, Eddie Kendricks. But the one artist that really transformed the sound of hip hop was James Brown. With the drum beats and the heavy percussion and the strong bass lines and guitar riffs, his music was really the engine that everyone used at a hip hop club. So my first experience with hip hop was 1974, going to a Kool Herc party in the Claremont section of the Bronx. I was fascinated because, he was playing all different kind of records, but he wasn't playing the whole record. He was just playing bits and pieces of the instrumentation, the break beats.
Back in the days, almost every song had a portion in it where all of the instruments kind of drop out, but the drum is usually there and it's usually just focused on the drum beat. So when a song gets to that point, that's considered the break beat. And what the early DJs did was they noticed that people would really get excited during that time, so they would just replay that and loop it and loop it and loop it. And then, producers that went on to create hip hop music actually started using break beats to make a song in and of itself.
I grew up in the northeast section of the Bronx in a neighborhood called the Valley, which is a private home residential community. The neighborhood that I grew up in was a brand new community. So my family was one of the first people to take the veterans' benefits. My father was a veteran of the Army, and purchase a home. It was a mixed community. There was Asians, there was Italians, there was African Americans, there was Latinos. So I never experienced any real racism at all in my entire life. I would see it on TV. I would see Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and I would see that there was issues, but I never really understood it because it wasn't in my community. Now, I can't say that for everywhere else in the Bronx, because the South Bronx at that time was very desolate because there was a lot of abandoned buildings. It looked like a war zone. And when the Crush Bronx was created, it created this division of the haves and the have-nots.
Hip hop created a musical landscape in the 70s and early 80s because we were just coming off the 60s where the entire city was bankrupt. We had a lot more problems to worry about than music at that time. So, that environment kind of gave birth to hip hop.
Bronx Point is a mixed-use development project. The Universal Hip Hop Museum serves as the cultural anchor, and on top of the museum, there's 540 units of 100% affordable housing. In 13 years, the hardest part of getting this project started was getting people to believe and trying to find the funding. A museum by itself is great, serves the community, but when you create a public and private partnership that includes affordable housing and cultural institutions, it creates this unique magic.
My name is Rocky Buchanan. I'm the Executive Director of the Universal Hip Hop Museum. So this journey started over 10 years ago with these guys behind me, Nick Benson, Joe Conjo, LG, Grand Wizard Theodore, Melly Mellon, Africa Bambaataa. And we started this journey not knowing where we were going. We didn't even have a name, but we came up with Universal because we want this museum to represent the entire world of hip hop. As you can see, that dream that started 10 years ago is now a reality.
So the city and the state have funded this project. Unbelievably, Mayor de Blasio was the first one to support the project. His first award of $4 million to help with the capital funding to start the construction was the fuse that lit the ignition for everyone else to pay attention. And when we teamed up with L&M Development Partners, who are commercial real estate developers, opened up the floodgates so that Other city elected officials like former Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz and Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson, Assembly Member LaToya Joyner, this is her district, Speaker Carl Hasty, former Governor Cuomo, current Governor Kathy Hochul, as well as the current Mayor Adams, are all very supportive of this project. But Microsoft is our main private funder. And Microsoft is our official technology partner. Microsoft's AI is part of the experience that we're creating. People that are following the Universal Hip Hop Museum are fortunate that we have a great exhibit called The Revolution of Hip Hop, located here at the Bronx Terminal Market. It gives them a sneak peek of what the future museum is going to be like when it opens its doors at the Bronx Point in 2024. Many of them have donated stuff that you see in here. LL Cool J's outfit, they'll see artifacts from Eric B, Run DMC, Salt-N-Pepa, Biz Markie, and so many others. So to have a museum that is dedicated to the preservation and documentation and celebration of hip hop history and culture, it's so important because without that documentation, no one would know how successful this culture has been in helping people elevate beyond the socioeconomic conditions that they live in, whether it's in East Harlem or in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Afrobeat's popularity has been increasingly soaring in mainstream appeal. We take a look back at an artist who spoke about its history and influence in music.
I'm someone who is on the path to self-awareness. So that's a part of who I am. That's a part of me. So when I create music, that's going to come out. My name is Prince Amu, and I am a musician, bassist, producer, composer, and overall artist. Moving to America from Nigeria, complete shock. When I moved to America, I moved to New York. There definitely is a culture difference. Living in Nigeria, for one, everybody's black. Your doctor is black, your lawyer is black, your teacher is black, your principal, the president's black. So that did have an effect on me. But when you move to America, it just changed. In New York, it's not in your face compared to when you're in the South and the stories that I heard being in the South. But I did see that difference when I moved here. I was 14 when I moved here, so I was able to assimilate into the culture a little easier while bringing my own culture. My dad still spoke Yoruba to me at home. You know, if your parents are speaking a language, you still in the culture. You ain't out, you know. I was still eating Nigerian food. My dad would sometimes take me to Yoruba parties. Even though I was assimilating with the culture, I was still holding on to my culture. Living in Nigeria, I listened to Afrobeat, but not as much as I did when I moved to the United States. I guess in the United States, I was a little bit more mature. I was older. Afrobeat was started by a gentleman called Fela Anikulapo Kuti. In the 70s, he went to somewhere in California, on the west coast of the United States, and he got introduced to funk music and African-American music in general. And that's where he actually got his inspiration for creating Afrobeat. Not just the sound of it, but the context. The whole Black Power movement, that moved him. And he felt that with his music, he also has to talk about the struggles that is going on with the Black man in West Africa, specifically Nigeria. Afrobeat incorporates jazz, it incorporates funk music, high life music, different sound elements of West Africa. It fuses cultures from all over. And I think that's why a lot of people here in America can familiarize themselves with it. They may not understand the style, but they do understand that it sounds very familiar to funk music. In Nigeria, It's a conglomerate of tribes and cultures. How cultures experience music, play music is different. The instruments are different. How they decide to express it is different. Music is, in a traditional sense, in Nigeria, it's used as a form of, one, bringing people together, but also as a way to get in touch with spirits and something that's beyond us. I got into music in probably 2000 when I was in City College. At the age of 21 or 22, I actually picked up the bass guitar by myself and I learned it. But in being at City College, I was able to take music theory classes so it could expand my knowledge a little bit on music since I was new to it. I also did engineering and a production course that got into music technology. I got into the programs and I started making beats from there. Afrobeat teaches me how to tell my story. You know, Fela is a huge inspiration of mine. He was influenced by the African American struggle. A Nigerian living in the United States, I'm witnessing the struggle firsthand. So his music, it's really teaching me how to express myself honestly. The band Brown Rice Family that I play with, we're from all over the world. I mean, there's a Jamaican, there's a South African, Haitian, Japanese, and myself, Nigerian, and an African American from the Bronx. Brown Rice Family is a little bit more world roots, but it does incorporate a little bit of Afrobeat here and there. That band, Brown Rice Family, I actually played before I started playing with Kaleta and the Super Yamba Band. Kaleta and the Super Yamba Band I've been playing with for roughly 5-6 years, maybe more. With Brown Rice Family, I've been playing with them for over 10 years. I joined Brown Rice Family in 2008. Our thing is to show people, hey, we're all from different parts of the world, but here we are making this one music. I feel like because that's who I am, I was able to attract that kind of band, and we were able to play that kind of music. With Kaleta and the Super Yamba Band, they're from North Carolina, a bunch of white guys who love Afrobeat, and they happened to find Kaleta, who used to play in Fela's band. The audience we played for, was familiar with Afrobeat. Some audiences, not all. It just depends on the state and it depends on the town. The new Afrobeat that's out today, that's spreading even more because of technology. Music moves faster today, but I think there's also a bigger influence because of the style. The new Afrobeat that's going on now has a little bit more of a dance hall, I would say, feel to it. It does have a little bit of the reggae element, but it does have the Nigerian traditional sound when I perform for people. I'm expressing for God. I'm expressing something that can connect with everyone. Where Afrobeat is going today and me being able to experience its growth around the world, I'm proud. It's showing that Nigerians have amazing artists. There's amazing art in Africa, period. But the fact that this is able to grow is just going to showcase so much more, and it's going to create opportunities. With the incidences of George Floyd and social injustice, that is going to influence people to talk more about it in the music because we're all experiencing it together. Personally, how is Afrobeat going to grow and change? I think that it's gonna go back to the roots. You know, yes, we're partying, we're loving, but we're also suffering. I think that Afrobeat is gonna go back to that root, or there might be more people who decide, you know what, instead of just doing songs for the chart and partying, let me also raise awareness of what is going on in my country. Separation is an illusion. There's no difference between all of us. The only difference that we see is the one that we tell ourselves. We're all sharing the same story in a different way.
That's our show. If you want to know more about the guests we featured, check out our Instagram page at Shades of Us TV and online at tv.cuny.edu. I'm Darryl Brown. See you next time on Shades of Us.